of what the chairperson is going through. And as a result of the condition in which he is going through, he did engage me in terms of coming to his rescue while he is recuperating from the COVID-19. On behalf of the team, let's wish him a speedy recovery and probably revert back to Grace, just in terms of the apologies that we have received.
What is going on? Good afternoon, honorable members and colleagues. We have received one apology so far from Ms. Matebula. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Grace. That is the apology that we have. I've seen Honorable Tim Bratuseth, I've seen Honorable Bishop, I've seen Honorable Mamarukhan, I've seen Honorable Dango, I've seen Honorable Mushodi. I think Honorable Mushodi was the first to log in, and we did indeed want to commend the presence of the members. Maybe what we just need to do is guidance from Honorable Dango. Do you have any engagement with Honorable Khai? Honorable Dango? Honorable Tim?
Chair, I just wanted to note the apology of Honorable Lont. He did advise that he submitted an apology, but maybe it didn't get to you. Honorable Lont did submit an apology.
Thank you, Honorable Tim. Honorable members, let's note that the apology, so Honorable Lont and also Honorable Matebula is. Did you get any from Honorable Apleni and Honorable Landsman? Thank you. With those apologies, can we then take this opportunity to welcome the Department of Trade and Competition, and as the standing chair for the Select Committee on Trade and Industry, Economic Development, Small Business, Tourism, Employment and Labor. We were briefed that the thrust of today's presentation will be centered around the presentation on the South Africa-UK trade relations and SACUM-UK EPA, which is the Economic Partnership Agreement, and also the overview of the SA-US trade relations and AGOA. I think probably just before we give over to the leadership of the department, just to give us an opening remarks and also the context within which the presentation will be made. Just to record that in addition to the members that we have that I've alluded to, we'll also have the committee secretary, Grace Dinizulu. We also have the content advisor, Dumo. We also have the researcher, that is Bele. And let me give over, while appreciating also the presence of the media team from the province, from Parliament, and also those that are watching from home, give over to the team that is leading the department. I suspect it to be Ambassador Karim. Just to introduce the team that is worth over to you, Ambassador Karim.
Well, thank you very much, Chairperson. Good afternoon to you and to all the honorable members. I'm making the presentation today. We have a couple of colleagues with us from the department to provide some support. Elizabeth van Rienen and Nikki Kruger on the platform together with me. I think we just need to arrange for the presentation to be loaded, and I can proceed.
I see that you also have Solofelo.
Oh yes, of course.
She's
in Parliament every day, so she's also part of our team. Thank you very much, Chairperson. As you indicated, our brief today was to provide an update on the SACU, Southern African Customs Union, that includes South Africa, plus Mozambique, economic partnership agreement with the UK. We'll provide an update on that. And we've also been asked to provide an update on South Africa-US trade relations, just an update of where things are standing and what to expect. The slide before the one that is up is just my details. This one is the acronyms that are used in the presentation for the members' information. Those are the two areas that we would cover today.
Maybe Ambassador Karim, you can switch off your video now so that
Sure.
we improve the communication.
I'm happy to do that, Chairman. If we could move on. Start with the...
Thank you, Chairperson, for allowing me in and trying that.
Okay. The first part of the presentation, it will cover South Africa-UK relations and the economic partnership agreement that we've just negotiated and concluded last year with the UK. It's important to recall that the UK is a very important trading partner to South Africa. It's our 5th largest trading partner in the world, with total trade of around 110 billion rand in 2019. And this has grown from 73 billion in 2014. So you see a steady increase in our overall bilateral trade with the UK, and that includes exports and imports. For South African exports, our exports were around 68.1 billion in 2019, and that's been seen an average increase of 12.6% since 2014. Our main exports to the UK include platinum, motor vehicles, citrus and other fresh fruit, catalytic converters and iron ore. And those are the main exports, but it is not the full list of products that we export to the UK. Similarly, imports from the UK have also increased an average of 3.1% since 2014, now amounting to about 41.3 billion rand worth of imports from the UK. And the main imports are printed materials, machinery, computer equipment, vehicles, whiskies, electric equipment, including sound and visual equipment. And these categories are the categories that are set out in our tariff book. So that's how they are classified. The trade between South Africa and the UK historically has been part of the UK, as the UK is part of the EU. Our trade with the UK has been conducted under the terms of the SADC-EU Economic Partnership Agreement that has been in force since October 2016. It's important to note that South Africa doesn't negotiate arrangements on its own. We are members of the Southern African Customs Union, and because we have a common external tariff that is the same tariff arrangement for all the members of SACU, including Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Namibia, and of course South Africa. For the purposes of the negotiations between us and the EU, the EPA agreement that had been the frame within which South Africa had conducts its relations with the UK. That arrangement, that SADC-EU EPA arrangement, includes not only SACU, but it also has Mozambique, and that is on the one side with the EU on the other. Going back in a little bit of history, the SADC-EU EPA that we mentioned has been in force since October 2016, replaced a previous agreement that we had, a bilateral agreement that we had with the EU, between South Africa and the EU, and which was concluded in 1999, the Trade, Development and Cooperation Agreement. So that agreement from 1999 was replaced by the SADC-EU EPA with the other, now including the other SACU members and Mozambique. Can we move on? And then honorable members will recall that in March 2017, the UK formally notified its intention to leave the EU. And in terms of the agreement that they established with the EU soon after, the idea was that the UK would leave the EU on the 31st of January 2020 through the so-called withdrawal agreement. And that withdrawal agreement stipulates that EU trade agreements with other parties, such as with us, will continue to apply until the 1st of January next year. So it has a transitional arrangement where the old agreements would continue to apply to the UK for a period of 1 year. But almost immediately after we received the information that the UK was going to leave the EU, SACU, Mozambique got together with the UK, and we agreed to negotiate, to initiate negotiations for an agreement that would essentially be between us and the UK, but would carry over the essential terms of the SADC, the EU SADC EPA into a new bilateral agreement between us. Those negotiations went on for a couple of years. And in October last year, honorable members may recall, those negotiations were concluded, and the agreement, South Africa has ratified the agreement last year in December. And the effect of this essentially has been to ensure that the trade between the Southern African Customs Union, that includes South Africa, plus Mozambique and the UK, continues uninterrupted when the UK leaves the EU, as we expect at the end of this year. I mentioned that the terms of the SADC-EU Economic Partnership Agreement have largely been transferred and transposed into the new agreement that we have with the UK. But there were some very specific aspects of the agreement that needed particular attention. And I'll explain these in a little bit more detail in the next slides. But these covered specific attention was required on how we address tariff rate quotas, how we deal with inputs that come from the EU that are included in products that we export between the UK and SACU and Mozambique, how those would be treated. There were some transitional arrangements that were needed to ensure that we properly transit from the current agreement under the EU to the new agreement. There were some specific aspects for geographic indications, the protection of names that we provide to our products. And there was a specific discussion that we had with the UK about future work that we would need to undertake once the agreement comes into force. Now, just to explain, these are some technical aspects of the negotiations, but they're quite important to ensure that the trade continues in a way that is uninterrupted. And the first point is with respect to the TRQs. Now, a TRQ is a tool that we use in trade agreements, which allows the parties preferential access, but for a limited amount of products. So we would say certain tonnage of sugar or wheat or whatever the case may be would enter into one or another country at a reduced tariff level. If that quantity is exceeded, then the higher tariff that applies to everyone in the world would then apply. So the tariff preferences are conditioned by a quantitative limitation. Under the EU SADC EPA, the UK shares TRQs with other EU members on exports from SACU, exports to SACU on 8 agricultural products. What that means is that for 8 agricultural products, imports from the EU have an overall quantity limitation. And so we needed to make sure that for the UK, that their portion of those imports could continue. Similarly, in the reverse, for South Africa, we have 13 tariff rate quotas on our exports to the EU, and these are in agricultural products. And what we needed to make sure is that when we continue to export to the UK, the portion that we were exporting to them under the previous agreement would be carried over into the new agreement. So it's a TRQs now specifically designed to accommodate the trade on those products between the two partners. And how we defined how much quantity we provided was based on the historical trade that we have with the UK. And for us, the critical products were wine, sugar, canned fruit, and fruit juices. But there are a number of others, less significant in the sense of the quantity that we export to the UK. The other important point to bear in mind is that these quantities increase at an annual basis by a small percentage. The second important point to bear in mind is that in our trade between the UK and the EU, and it works on both sides, many of the products that we trade with each other have inputs into that product that are sourced from the EU. So the UK, for instance, in some of the cars that it would send to South Africa and vice versa, cars that South Africa would send to the EU may have components that are sourced from the EU. And we wanted to make sure that would continue to be the case, even if the UK leaves the EU. So we have a provision, a very specific provision that allows products sourced from the EU into our production processes. They would continue to benefit from the trade preferences between us under this new agreement, and that means that they would meet the so-called rules of origin. And what this does is that it ensures that the highly integrated value chains that operate between the EU, South Africa, and the UK, particularly in automobiles, but in some other products as well, that those value chains continue to operate in an unimpeded way. This provision that we have in place will be applicable for 3 years. We're also hoping that the UK and the EU can come to a final agreement that will settle all of this and consolidate it. But in any case, this will operate in our agreement with the UK for 3 years. And after the 3-year time period, we can agree to extend it if we need, or adjust it if we think necessary, but that's something that we will consider in 3 years' time after the agreement enters into force. I mentioned that we also had to have some transitional arrangements to ensure that certain actions and measures that were in the previous agreement are carried over into this new agreement with the UK. And in particular, really a very important aspect of it is that we have had in place a safeguard against EU members, including the UK, a safeguard against imports of poultry. We saw a large surge in the imports of poultry from EU members back in 2016, 2017, and we imposed a safeguard duty a couple of years ago. It still has 2 years to run, or about 1.5 years to run. And we wanted to make sure that in this new agreement with the UK, that safeguard would continue to apply to products coming from poultry products from the UK. And so that was an important transitional measure that we needed to put into place. The UK will also follow the same safety and health regulations that is applied on agricultural trade with the EU. They'll continue to apply those for a period of time. On customs matters, the specific types of documentation that is needed to facilitate trade and facilitate entry into each other's markets will continue to use the same documentation that is used under the SADC EU EPA. So that allows for some continuity. And if there are changes in future, we have a provision that indicates that the UK should provide us sufficient time to adjust to those new regulations and particularly documentation requirements. We also spent some time in the discussions with the UK agreeing to some elements of what we call a built-in agenda. These are issues that we hoped to resolve in the negotiations, but we did not. So we've identified a number of important elements that we would take up in a future engagement with the UK. We have this, what we call DFQF. It's basically full market access, or to increase the number of TRQs on agricultural products into the UK. So we want to come back to that discussion of how we could continue to improve our agricultural access to the UK market. I mentioned the cumulation provisions with the EU in our bilateral trade. We want to extend that to allow Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Namibia, and Mozambique to also cumulate with South African products for export to the UK. So this was a provision that we had tried to get in to the agreement. When we concluded it, we were not successful, but we want to come back to this in the future engagement. We also want to deal with small cars that we've seen a rapid imports of cars with small engine capacities. We want to review the tariff treatment on that. We want to talk to the UK about export taxes in future. And we want to improve our cooperation on technical barriers to trade, that's TBTs, which have to do with technical standards, how we conform to those technical standards and the procedures around that. So there's a work program that we're looking to develop with the UK in that respect. I'd mentioned that South African Parliament ratified what we're calling now the SACU-UK Economic Partnership Agreement. It was ratified in December last year. fairly quickly. We did it fairly quickly because we wanted to make sure that we were ready if there were any new changes in the whole process around Brexit. We understand that the UK has ratified the agreement. Botswana, Lesotho have also ratified. We were advised just last week that Eswatini and Namibia are at a fairly advanced state of ratification in their parliaments. And so we think that we'll all be ready to have the agreement enter into force on the 1st of January. The one step that is going to be needed is that once parliaments ratify, there is an instrument of ratification, a legal document that needs to be prepared, usually by the Departments of Foreign Affairs, and those have to be deposited at the SACU Secretariat in Windhoek by the 30th of November, because the agreement says you need to give it a month, you need to submit it a month before it comes into force. So we have to do it by the 30th of November, so that the agreement is fully in force on the 1st of January when the UK leaves the EU. So that's the first part of the presentation, honorable members, Chairman. I'm going straight into the second part of our presentation, and this is to look at how South Africa's trade relations have evolved with the US, and what we need to consider and how we should be beginning to think about the future. One point I should state right up front is, of course, the US remains a very important trading partner to South Africa. It still remains our third largest trading partner. And I'll get back to how the figures have evolved in terms of the trade in the slide that's still coming up. But just to say that South African exports enter the US under three different trading regimes, three different arrangements. They enter many of our products, the bulk of our products enter the US market on the basis of what we call most favored nation tariff rates. These are the rates, the specific levels of tariffs that must be paid when you enter into the US market, and those are applied to all WTO members in an evenly. There are another range of products, 4,650 products that enter the US market under what they call the GSP, or the Generalized System of Preferences, and that is at a preferential rate, at a much lower rate than what other WTO members would need to pay. Those preferences are extended to most developing countries around the world. South Africa benefits from that preferential access as well. In addition, there are another 1,835 products that are included in the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and that gives additional, preferential access on those additional products, but just for sub-Saharan African countries. So it adds to the GSP another 1,835 products. So around 6,000, a little bit more than 6,000 products, South Africa can access the US market at a preferential level. In most cases, it's at a zero duty. The way the system works is that you need to have qualified for the GSP to qualify for AGOA. And one of the advantages of AGOA is that the benefits are locked in for extended periods of time, whereas the GSP has annual reviews where adjustments can be made. So AGOA has the benefit of, has had in past the benefit that the preferences are locked in for an extended period of time. AGOA was established in 2000. It has been renewed twice. The first period ran until 2008 and was extended until 2015. And in 2015, it was extended again and will last until 2025. The advantage of this extended periods under AGOA was essentially aimed to foster greater certainty in the market access that we have to the US market. And the idea was that by giving these extended periods, enhancing certainty, there would be greater investment in sub-Saharan Africa for the production of goods to access the US market. Now, while we say that, we also need to bear in mind that both of those arrangements, the GSP and AGOA, have a range of eligibility requirements, and both have of those eligibility, and those eligibility requirements give considerable discretion to the US government to remove countries if they feel that you haven't met one or another of the criteria. And over the last period of since both the GSP and the AGOA have been in force, there have been occasions when countries have been removed from the preferences based on concerns that the US government would have about whether or not they're meeting the eligibility requirement. So on the one hand, there's this degree of certainty that it provides, but there is this question of discretion in eligibility that needs to be taken into account. Now, coming to our trade flows more directly, we basically have set out here the trend of our trade over, in the next two slides, our trend in trade with the US over the last 20 years or so. And what we saw is in the period from 2001 to about 2011, overall trade between South Africa and the US grew significantly, more than doubled. From $7.3 billion US in 2001, it peaked in 2011 at around $16.3 billion US. Since then, we've seen a decline in the trade since 2011. And last year, we recorded a total trade in the region of $12.3 billion US. If you break it down by exports and imports, you'll see that South African exports to the US increased from around $4.3 billion in 2001. That was how much we exported in 2001. It more than doubled up until by 2008, which was the peak, about $10 billion US of exports at that time. And you recall that this is when we had the onset of the global financial crisis. And since then, we've seen our exports decline again, now down to $7.6 billion in 2019. $7.6 billion US in 2019. South African imports from the US, similar story, increasing from 2.8 billion in 2001 to 7.1 billion in 2012, but then declining to 4.6 billion in 2019. If we break it down and look at the on a year-to-year basis, most years South Africa runs a trade surplus, a small trade surplus with the US. Sometimes that has to do with the exchange rates, changes in the exchange rates. But the common factor in all of this is that South Africa's exports of commodities, platinum, diamonds, and gold, still take up a very large part of the bilateral trade, and that tends to be quite it tends to be stable and quite significant. The great advantages of the GSP and AGOA for South Africa has been the preferential access that it gives, that those preferences give to our exports of higher value added manufactured products. So our industrial products, not commodities. And if you break it down, you'll see that under the GSP, our exports include chemicals, iron and steel, which is some value added, precious stones, some value added, metals, machinery, plastics, and auto components. So those are those take up the bulk of our exports under the GSP. The products under AGOA include even higher value added, have included even higher value added products, and mainly autos, completely built up cars, iron and steel, fruit and nuts, organic chemicals, beverages, and spirits. And so that the great advantage of, as I said, GSP and AGOA is that it helps to support our industrial development, our industrial production and exports. And if we look at the shares of our products under the different arrangements, under the MFN, the GSP, and AGOA, we see that under the GSP and AGOA, there was a greater share of exports under those regimes, whereas in 2001, preferential, those products under these products would have been, our exports would have increased from just 20% of these value-added products to over 44% in 2014. So a much greater share of our total exports were in value-added products, but that has fallen back to 26% in 2019. Under the GSP, our exports increased from 11.4% in 2001 to 17% in 2005, but then fell, which was the peak in 2005, but then declined to 10% in 2019. Similarly, the share of our exports under AGOA, excluding the GSP, increased from just 9.4% in 2001 to 31% in 2013, but then it has declined to 16% in 2019. I mentioned that our exports of minerals and is the mainstay of our production and export of minerals is the mainstay of our bilateral trade and bilateral exports to the US. And those have always gone into the US under the most favored nation arrangement, and they continue to contribute the largest share of South Africa's exports to the US. In 2001, those exports accounted for 79% of all our exports. As a percentage of total exports, it declined to 56% in 2013, but have started to rebound again. And now those MFN exports account for about 74% of our total exports in 2019. So what this all says, if it's just to try to summarize very briefly, is that while AGOA and the GSP made a big impact on seeing our exports of value-added products in the first half of the last 2 decades, the first 10 years of the last 2 decades, what we're seeing is that those value-added products are being reduced, and a greater share of our total exports to the US, again, are commodities. So we're seeing a decline in the value of the US market for South Africa's value-added manufactured products. Of course, this is in aggregate terms. In certain products, it would vary, but in aggregate terms, this is the picture that begins to emerge. I think it's also important to note that overall, the US as a share, the US ranking in our total global trade has declined. They used to be in 2010, the US would account for 8.7% of our total trade globally. It's now in the region of about 6.9%. That was in 2019. What explains these changes? I think in general, the decline in the conditions in the US market is due to very weak, generally weak trading conditions globally. And we've also seen the demand and the growth in the US economy, in the real economy, in the manufacturing economy, has been subdued ever since the financial crisis in 2008. It's never returned to those types of, those levels of performance. In addition, we've also seen a significant shift in the US import policy stance. This administration, and to some extent this began even in the previous administration, much greater focus on trying to support US manufacturing, and this has become particularly pronounced under the current administration's America First policies. And these policies that have been implemented have affected South Africa in quite specific ways. Members will recall that in March 2018, the US imposed tariffs of 10% and 25% on aluminum and steel imports from WTO members, except all WTO members except 6. But we were affected, and that saw South Africa's steel exports to the US decline by 33% between 2017 and 2018. We say that these are WTO inconsistent tariffs because certainly in the case of steel, they were above the rates that the US had committed to not to exceed in trade with WTO partners, but it overshot that. In 2018, the Department of Commerce in the US initiated an investigation into whether or not they should increase tariffs in auto for auto imports. And what that did, it didn't only affect South Africa, but many other countries. It generated uncertainty as to whether our exports would continue to be given the preferential tariffs that we enjoy under AGOA. But even before the investigation was completed, and the investigation is still ongoing, it's not completed yet, companies, firms around the world began to rethink their sourcing decisions. They began to rethink how they would supply the US markets with products. And the effect of that was that we saw South African auto exports to the US that were worth about 1.2 billion in 2017 fall by 51% in just 1 year. So essentially, the companies that were exporting to the US from South Africa decided to supply the US market from plants within the US that had been established there. In June 2020, so just a few months ago, a similar announcement of an investigation into vanadium imports was announced in the US. And so we are concerned currently that our exports of vanadium, which are also significant, may also be at risk. In addition to this, we've also seen from time to time the risk of being removed from the preference schemes, and usually there's a concern from a company in the US or some state congressperson, a congressperson who have raised a particular problem about South Africa's trade policy. And whenever that happens, there is a review of South Africa's eligibility or questions raised about South Africa's eligibility. And we've seen some instances of this over the last few years. In 2015, at the time that the last, the last extension of the AGOA legislation, there was a provision that was introduced, basically it's been called an out-of-cycle review of South Africa's AGOA eligibility. And essentially what that did was that there was a real concern that we would be removed from AGOA. And to try to avoid that, and I'm sure many of the honorable members will recall this, we had to enter into negotiations with the US, again, with respect to poultry imports. And in those negotiations, we offered the US an annual quota of 65,000 tons for poultry that had been previously subject to anti-dumping duties. And this was to avoid being removed from AGOA. Members may also recall that last year in October, the United States Trade Representative agreed to initiate a review of South Africa's GSP eligibility because there were some concerns from US firms that had argued South Africa's copyright amendment bill undermined their commercial interests. So again, we had to go through a review under the GSP with the attendant risk that we would be removed from the GSP. We engaged with the US, and of course, we all know that the president on the 16th of June decided to return those bills to Parliament, the copyright bill to Parliament, because there were some constitutional concerns. And so that has effectively delayed any decision by the US on this matter at this time. But I think the main message I'm communicating here is all of these things tend to have a dampening effect on our exports and trade. Exporters get very nervous when they hear about these reviews, and quite often they start to make adjustments to their export strategy and to their sourcing strategies, and that has implications. I had indicated that AGOA, the last extension of AGOA was in 2015. It was extended for 10 years, and it will expire in 2025, in about 5 years from now. We had a meeting, an annual meeting of AGOA with the US and those African countries, sub-Saharan African countries that benefit from AGOA. We had a meeting with the US last year, and at that meeting, the US indicated that after 2025, it did not intend to extend AGOA. It did give some signal that if it was going to be extended, it would not be in the same way, and it would not include the same set of countries. And the message that we took away from that was that some of the larger developing countries, such as South Africa, is unlikely to be included in future AGOA if it is extended. We're also aware that the GSP scheme itself is under review, and that could also make changes to the way those preferences are offered, who they're offered to, the scope of the preferences. That could also be something that we would need to take into account. So again, I think the point here is that these schemes are not necessarily bound and certain, and changes can be expected specifically in respect to AGOA. At that meeting last year that I mentioned, the USTR also announced that it was taking a new approach, trade policy approach to sub-Saharan Africa. It proposed that it wants to negotiate free trade agreements, and that it prefers free trade agreements in general, and that its proposal was to negotiate a free trade agreement with one African country, and that agreement would serve as a model for other bilateral FTAs with other African countries in future that were interested. They also indicated at that meeting that the recently concluded US, Mexico, Canada free trade agreement would constitute the model for all FTAs in future. Now, we have had some experience with FTAs with the US. Over a decade ago, we started as SACU. We had attempted to negotiate an FTA with the US. And so we have some experience from that, but we've also followed fairly carefully how the US FTAs have evolved since then. And just to summarize, I would say that US FTAs are comparatively demanding in terms of what they cover, in terms of how much market opening they demand, and the scope for flexibility is comparatively narrow. And you could look at it in comparison, for example, to the agreement that we have with the EU on the EPA in terms of the coverage and the scope for flexibility. US FTAs require close to full tariff liberalization for trade in industrial and agricultural goods. Unfortunately, while they want full access to markets for agricultural goods, there are no limits to the kind of support that is provided in agriculture, and we are aware that the US provides enormous subsidies to their agricultural sector that gives them an unfair advantage in agricultural trade. Also have rules that limit government measures for preferential procurement, such as we have in South Africa, measures that we would want to put in to promote localization, to encourage domestic industry. There are measures, there are provisions in the US FTAs that limit that. And at the same time, they seek access to government procurement markets. So for procurement, we know in South Africa, we use our procurement policy to support small businesses, to support Black economic empowerment, to support localization, and a range of efforts to support local development. We would have to open up those markets for US firms as well, according to the template that the US uses. In addition, there are requirements for extensive liberalization and deregulation in trade-related sectors, such as in finance, in services, in finance, in telecommunications, amongst others. And the US FTAs have very strong rules, stronger than in the WTO, rules to protect intellectual property rights, that also increasingly restrict policies for technology transfer. And in more recent versions of the US FTAs, there are very strong provisions on digital trade. The FTAs prohibit customs duties on electronic transmission. So if countries want to try to collect duties from goods traded electronically, they would be prohibited from doing that. Measures that you want to build up domestic capabilities are prohibited. Trying to limit any measures to encourage local content is prohibited. But at the same time, there is a provision that would lock in free flow of data, so allow data to flow completely free without restriction under these FTAs. So in sum, I think this is the last slide, and on this, just to say that South Africa needs to begin to think very carefully about our post-AGOA trade relations with the US. It's 5 years away. 5 years can go relatively quickly. So we need to start thinking about that now. Of course, we need to recall that the US is a very important trading partner. We continue to benefit from AGOA and the GSP at present, and we should make the most of that. We also have to recognize that the US is an important source of investment and technology. And the final point that we thought important just to bring to the attention of the members is that we work continuously with the US government and the embassy in South Africa to enhance our trade and investment flows. And issues of concern crop up on both sides. And so a lot of time is spent on trying to address those. And I think, Chair, I've come to the end of the presentation, I believe. Oh no, I'm sorry. There is one more. There's one more slide. Chair, there was an indication that we received where the select committee, of course, representing provinces, wanted to know what does this all mean for the provinces. And so we put together this slide just to outline the fact that we've been dealing basically with trade flows and looking at the increases and decreases in that over time. And just to say that we use official trade data that is provided by the South African Revenue Services. So all the figures that we have are provided by SARS, and the trade data, the exports and imports are aggregated at a national level. So they don't give us information at a provincial level. We don't have that information on hand. We engage when we negotiate agreements, and when we engage when we deal with these issues, we also engage with NEDLAC and the Agricultural Trade Forum, where we speak to exporters. But the information that we get from them is also at a national level. When you look at export data, it covers around 6,400 products. And those products can be sourced from across the country. It's not possible for us to know from which province they come with any degree of precision. And on the import side, the data is collected at ports of entry. It could be Cape Town, it could be Durban, it could be PE, it could be land borders. But we don't collate information about what is the final destination is within South Africa. Of course, we know that certain provinces specialize in certain exports. This is just from sort of general knowledge. We have this second last bullet here saying some of the main production of the different provinces in South Africa. But from the department side, we really do not have any access to precise data of production and export at the provincial level. So I thought that's important to make those few points to the honorable members. Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Karen, for the presentation. The manner in which we were able to run through various key areas of the trade relations between ourselves and UK, and between ourselves and the United States, but of course, taking into account the economic partnership agreement that involves SACUM and also UK. The regime that is governing the trade relations between South Africa, whether it is under GSP, whether it's under AGOA. I think there is a clarity of thought around that. Other members, I'll then open the floor for engagement in terms of the issues canvassed from the Department of Trade and Competition on the trade relations between the country and also those two countries, UK and USA. Let me just check in terms of any point, Tim, that you want to raise? Honorable Dango? Honorable members? There. Honorable members? Can you hear me? I suspect there might be a technical glitch. Let's just check.
I hear you, Chair. I'm here. I'm
Okay.
here. You.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes,
Chair. Mashodi, I'm
thank-
concerned. Is there any point that you want to raise?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Let me also welcome the presentation that you received right now. I've got only one question, Honorable Chair. I just want to, Ambassador, maybe just to give me the explanation of AGOA or AGOA. That is the only question that I have, Honorable Chair.
Okay, Honorable Mashodi, I think in terms of that question, I think it's African Growth and Opportunity Act. African Growth and Opportunity Act is the act that governs the trade relations between developing countries and the United States. I think it's AGOA, if I'm not mistaken, because it's like as I said, it's African Growth and Opportunity Act. Honorable Boshoff, is there any point that you want to raise? Probably let me probably from my side just while honorable members are still muted, pose a number of questions from my side. There's a slide that speaks to I think it's right at the bottom. Sometimes the policy positions of concern that the United States will have with regard to some of the policies that would be advancing, and I know that, like I have correctly pointed out, that among the concerns that they had was with regard to the copyright bill, and this copyright bill amendment act is before Parliament, and a number of engagements has indeed taken place between the portfolio committee and the leadership of the department, which obviously I think there is a sense of appreciation now of where we come from with regard to this. But I'm more concerned about the concession that we made with regard to the 65,000 poultry. Is this concession only given to United States? What about other EU countries that we are trading with? Particularly with regard to UK in this instance, won't they take this matter further to say, just like we have made a concession for the United States on the poultry, what about us? The second point relates to the fact that there is an opportunity within the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which has the potential to become the largest free trade area in the world, and also because it will be uniting 1.3 billion people, and uniting them in a 3.4 trillion economic bloc. To me, I think this is an opportunity that as a country we must embrace it, take into account some of this policy uncertainty sometimes on the part of the US, which obviously threatens our commitment to redress the imbalances of the past, because the issue of preferential procurement policy, the issue of the copyright amendment bill, is dealing with the legacies of the past, but of course appreciating also the need to intervene on the part of the challenges that are faced by I want to believe the beneficiary of the artists, who might have, because of failure on their part to lock certain key points in their relation, probably with promoters, died destitute, and therefore as a country we have a responsibility to deal with that. So therefore I think it is important to also appreciate the fact that this happens within a period where the last election result favored Trump. So we are looking forward to probably within keen interest in terms of the outcome of the contest between Biden and Trump. What will be important is it's the decisions that we take as a country. Clearly, we stand to gain or lose depending in terms of who win between Biden and Trump, because of some of the pressure that is put by the US government in terms of putting pressure on our part to stay away or to sort of desist from our progressive policies that are addressing the imbalances of the past. But we also take into account the probably maybe what to get a sense in terms of what the opportunities would be there between these two countries in terms of our trade relations within our broader attempt to deal with the economic recovery under our economic reconstruction and recovery plan. Let's say AGOA comes to an end in 2025. What is it that could be done to ensure that, like we did with the UK leaving EU, to put in place measures to ensure that we mitigate the rippling effects and ensure that there's continuity in terms of our trade relations. But more than that, I think what will be critical also is how do we ensure that whatever happens between beyond 2025, our export market must not be under threat, because I think what will be critical is for us to ensure that definitely there is a process, there is an attempt to cushion and mitigate the damage that could follow from the AGOA coming to an end. The last point will be having ratified economic partnership agreement between SACUM and UK in December. What has happened between December and the emergence of total shutdown, and between total shutdown and now, has there been any engagement with regard to or have you got a sense as to whether is Boris Johnson still pursuing the issue of the UK leaving EU, and are there any lessons to learn that we need to probably take into account, or other areas that we might not have canvassed in the negotiations between ourselves as part of SACU and UK that probably might need to be revisited? Let me just check with Honorable Dango whether is there any point that Honorable Dango would want to raise?
Yes, sir. The one area that I'm a bit concerned about is the new trade agreements or new agreements that are being reached between Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. How does that impact upon what we're doing? And from my previous experience, Ambassador Karim, is that Europe will always dictate in which direction Africa should go or should not go. In that kind of thing, do you see any kind of problems that we may take forward there?
Thank you, Honorable Tim. I get a sense that Honorable Tim is struggling. Can we then, within that context, Honorable Mamarakhani, is there any point that you want to raise?
Sorry, Chair.
Okay. All right, Tim.
Chair, no, I'm satisfied. I've no questions today, Chair.
Thank you, Tim.
Oh boy.
Thank you, Honorable Mamarakhani. Can we then, in the absence of any further engagement, revert back to the ambassador? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the questions. Just to underscore what was said in the presentation, that and that's responding to the first question raised about AGOA. It is the African Growth and Opportunity Act, as you indicate. It is it's US legislation. So it is not something that we negotiate with the US. This is a piece of legislation that is established, created by the US Congress, and that provides, as I'd indicated, preferential access on 1,800 or so products coming from sub-Saharan African countries. So it provides us with a competitive advantage in the US market as compared to other countries that are exporting those same products to the US. And so that is the value of it to sub-Saharan Africa. And for sub-Saharan African countries, South Africa is one of the, is perhaps the one country that has taken advantage of those preferences more than many other countries. And that's because we have an economy that is more diversified than most other African countries. So that's really the advantage of AGOA. Coming to the other questions that you raised, Chair, I'll try to answer it in the following way. I'd indicated that AGOA and the GSP have they're pieces of legislation by the US Congress. They provide these preferences for the products, as I've mentioned, that give us an advantage over other competitors. But they also have eligibility requirements. So they set out that for you to benefit from these preferences, you need to be market economy, you need to have democracy, you need to have good governance, you need to protect intellectual property, you need to protect investment. So it has a whole range of criteria that is established at various levels of detail. And if any member of Congress or if the administration itself is concerned about a policy of one country that is getting that benefit, they can ask you for to provide clarification. They can invite you to, they will invite you to explain what is the measure. And if they find that the measure is that they cannot agree with the measure, they have the option of being able to remove that country from that program, so that you would no longer get that preferential access. And what I was trying to say was that we have encountered that. First was at the time of the last extension of AGOA, where there were very serious concerns expressed by the US, or the US expressed their concern that their poultry exports to South Africa were being restricted by high anti-dumping tariffs. And they then asked for some concession, and if we did not negotiate that, we had the chance, there was a big risk that we would not get the congressional support for South Africa's inclusion under AGOA. And so it was in that context that we started the negotiation. And the 65,000 tons that was offered was what was the final deal that was agreed to. So on the one hand, the US got this access. On the other hand, we continued to continue our preferential access to the US under AGOA. So that was the deal. It is not comparable to the arrangement that we have with the EU or with the UK, because in those our trade relations with both the UK and the EU are conducted under a different negotiated trade agreements between the two of us. The economic partnership agreement with the EU, which up to today includes the UK, and after January 1st next year, a separate agreement with the UK. Those are negotiated agreements, and so the commitments are on both sides. One side can't change it automatically. So they could make a request that they would like to get preferential access, but because it's a negotiation, they would have to offer us something in return. So this type of agreement is very different to the arrangement that we have with the US. With the US, it is a US act. With the EU and the UK, these are negotiated agreements. The second part of your question was the opportunity of the AFCFTA. And of course, I think we all have great expectations that the AFCFTA, we will conclude the negotiations and then this would come into force. The AFCFTA agreement does not have provisions that would limit us on procurement, on localization, or Black economic empowerment in South Africa, or support for small business, or support for small industries. So none of that. So we're looking forward to the AFCFTA being concluded and operationalized, hopefully by next year, but certainly as soon as possible. The question that you raise with AGOA in that respect is a concern for us. We would want to see the African Union members participating in the AFCFTA focus in on negotiating a deal amongst ourselves. That will be important for Africa. and not to be distracted by negotiations with other third parties at this stage. And of course, this is our preference, and many countries in Africa agree. But of course, it's not possible to determine the decisions of sovereign economies. And if any member decided that they would want to negotiate a bilateral agreement with the US, they would have the right to do so. The question that I think the question that you raised in this context is post-AGOA, what should we do to cushion and mitigate the fact that we may lose market access there? And this is why I think we're raising it early. We need to start to think very carefully about it. Some obvious answers or things that we need to think about, how we encourage, we spend more time promoting exports to the US, finding buyers in the US for South African products. So a much more strengthened and focused export promotion set of activities. Another aspect of it is that where we are not able to get the access to the US, to what extent could those exports start to go to other markets, including the EU market or the UK market or the African market. So maybe we have to divert some of those exports to other markets, but we have to look at all of the options to mitigate the effect of losing the preference in the AGOA preferences in the UK market. Your fourth question was to do with whether or not the lockdown has had any bearing on the decision. This is how I understood the question. Any bearing on the decision by the UK on whether or not it will leave the EU? We have no information to suggest that there is a change in heart from the UK. In fact, the media reports that they are moving ahead with the plans to leave by the 1st of January. And there are intense negotiations, which are very difficult at the moment, between the UK and the EU about the trade arrangements that they will have in place. But that is also, the media reports are not very optimistic at the moment, but we know that there is some engagement still on that. But all of that to say that it looks like it doesn't look like there's going to be any reversal of the decision to leave the EU at the end of this year. And then I think the final question was about the role of the EU and the ACP in this. I had not prepared anything. I mean, I think this is a discussion that has to do with what happens between the ACP and the EU when the current Cotonou agreement runs out in a couple of years, and what type of arrangements are going to replace that. These are still discussions that are ongoing, but what we can say from a South African point of view and from a Southern African point of view is that we have an agreement already in place with the EU on the trade side. And so our agreement with the EU, the Economic Partnership Agreement, continues to be the framework and will remain the framework for our trade relations with the EU, irrespective of what happens with the Cotonou. But of course, we participate in that process as well. So I hope I've covered the questions, Chairman. Thank you.
The question that was posed by Honorable Dango, I think is it the one that you said you did not prepare anything on the Caribbean trade relations?
Yes, it's the ACP. It's about the ACP and the ACP post-Cotonou negotiations, which is which we didn't prepare for this meeting.
All right. No, I think it does make sense. I want to to check as well as there any follow-up questions from honorable members. In the absence of none, then want to take this opportunity to express on behalf of the committee our appreciations to the brief by the department as led by Ambassador Karim. Indeed, it shed more light in terms of where we are with regard to our trade relations, as it is centered on the SA-US trade relations, but also as part of SACUM-UK Economic Partnership Agreement. The overview that was given in terms of where we are, take into account different trade relations regime that governs this trade relations, whether it is on the UK side or whether it is on the US side, and where we are with regard to the possibilities in the future where a certain act on the part of the US might be changed, its impact in terms of our export and also import. But more than that, I believe the balance of trade between ourselves and those two countries. What is more critical is the ability on our part to ensure that the decline in terms of export, in terms of imports, is indeed arrested. But of course, we are mindful of where we are currently in terms of the broader impact of COVID-19 on the global economy, and the fact that it's only this month that we are beginning to open ourselves to the rest of the continent and also to the rest of the country. So we are in a much more better position to understand where we come from in terms of various products which constitute and form both our basket of imports and also our basket of export. So with those few words, let me express again our gratitude to the team of the department led by Ambassador Karim, but also the appreciation goes to the honorable members for having set aside time to be part of this meeting. I know that we have been engaged since 10 o'clock with the Deputy Minister in the presidency, and together with the Statistician General, Dr. Maluleke. So it has been a long day to you, but despite that, you had an opportunity to again display that high level of commitment to be able to ensure that this meeting indeed forms a quorum. The support given by the committee secretary, the content advisor, the researcher, is highly appreciated. With those few words, honorable members, we have indicated that we will not deal with the minutes. We'll deal with it 2 weeks from now when we come back from provincial week. And with those few words, the meeting stand adjourned. Thank you, honorable members.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Good about some fish and chips.
Thank you.
Now that we're offline, Chair, it's the first time I've heard Honorable Tim not ask a question.
I'm happy that we know my fish and chips is fine.
It's a long day, Honorable Dango, for us, and this logic of
Okay.
yes and what must teach us.
Don't tempt me now. Don't tempt me
Thank you,
now.
Honorable.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
We're going to teach us, Honorable Dango.
Let's meet tomorrow. Let's meet tomorrow in the with Praza. Don't
Yeah.
forget, Praza is 12 o'clock. Thank you. Bye.
When 10
Tomorrow.
o'clock?
Is it
10
10 o'clock?
o'clock.
I think it says it's is it 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock?
No,
Let me
it's
just
12
confirm.
o'clock, Chair. It's
12
12
o'clock. Yeah,
o'clock.
it's 12 o'clock.
12 o'clock.
It's 12 o'clock.
There's no link in the calendar. See you then, Chair. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'll see you in the building tomorrow then, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tango. Bye.
Bye.